So let's take your formula that you built. Now, how do we do that with a colleague or peer? I'm in marketing, and I've hit my numbers, but operations is not hit theirs. How do I have that? Because often, I would love to hear you talk about this. Sure. What holds us back from having that conversation?
Right.
And then how can we do that in a way that is healthy? So we're creating mutual accountability versus individual accountability. This is the Leadership Foundry podcast. Of course, I'm one of the hosts today, Brandon Smith, and I've got my co-founder and co-host, Randy Hain, on the show today. So you've got the Leadership Foundry team today as we take on an interesting challenge. Randy, my friend, how are you today?
I am excellent. How are you?
I'm doing well. It's been a great day of recording and excited for our conversation today. So to set this up, you and I were talking about what would be a good topic for us to share with our listeners today. And one of the things we keep hearing from clients is that big word, accountability.
Yes.
How do I hold more people accountable? How do I create a culture of accountability? How can we move the needle on accountability? And so we definitely hear that as a pain point. But no one really sits back and necessarily defines what they're looking for. They don't really define accountability. So, my friend, I would love to get your perspective and point of view on that. When you hear accountability, what does that mean to you?
Well, it's funny how you started out. I totally agree with you. It's one of those common problems. Every leader wags their finger at it and says, we've got an accountability problem. It's just not working. And then when you think about defining it, that's not very difficult. It's honoring your commitments. It's doing what you say you will do. But I think where the problem is, it's the messy middle. We know we have a problem, and we can actually define it, give it a definition, but how do we go about doing it? I think that's the issue. I don't know if that's your take, but I think it's the messy middle that we're just not doing well.
So where do you think that starts? Is that a strategic thing or a leadership at the most senior level thing? Is it a tactical thing at the end of meetings? Is the answer yes to all those? Where do we start on that?
The answer is yes.
Okay.
And it's funny, if you go out and look at some very traditional approaches, you're going to see things like, it's all about candor and commitment and clarity, or clarity and commitment and courage. And we see all these, very catchy ways to address accountability. But I actually think, and this is something that I think the Leadership Foundry does pretty well, I think this is how we've kind of built our reputation in our business, is I think we've got to get more focused on a practical application of a fix. Like what is something that we can put in place with our clients that will help them actually engage in solving this problem? And I think that's what we do pretty well. I say with humility, I think we can do that. Yeah. So I want to offer you something that you actually pioneered. You, my friend, pioneered. Oh. So you came up with the trust formula years ago. And it's probably one of the most popular things that we teach at the Leadership Foundry. It's well done. Companies use it everywhere. And you get the credit for bringing simplicity and clarity to the idea of trust. So I'm going to take a stab at this. And I've come up with a practical accountability formula.
Oh, okay. I love this.
So,
I think people will be chomping at the bit for this.
So bear with me.
All right, let's go.
Let's go on a journey. I'm going to give you a high level, and then I'd like to dive in, and then I want to get your take on this.
Beautiful.
So when I think about the practical accountability formula, at a high level, it's clarity plus effective business meetings multiplied by the degree of your personal ownership, and that's what equals practical accountability. So clarity plus effective business meetings times your degree of personal ownership. So let's unpack that just a little bit.
Yeah, please.
So clarity is something that we always talk to our leaders and our teams about. We've got to practice clarity. You've got to be better at communicating the why, the who, the what, the when. We have to define role clarity. We have to have good communication clarity. So as a leader or an aspiring leader, even if you're just leading a team as a team lead, whatever your role is, if you're the one that's driving the engine, if you're running things, you've got to practice clarity. So let's say that you're trying to solve a problem. You've got problems and you want better accountability on the other end. So as a leader, communicating with clarity what you want, when you want it, what the problem is, all of that. You've got to be really buttoned up about that. But then you think about, well, what are the vehicles that we can use? What are the different channels? Well, you and I talk a lot about dysfunctional business meetings. So part 2 of my formula is the clarity married to an effective business meeting. Well, what makes an effective business meeting? It's clearly an agenda. We have very specific topics to talk about. We assign tasks to get things done. We give ownership of those tasks to specific people, and we have clear deadlines to get those things done. And then we have a scribe taking notes to get those notes, capturing what we spoke about out to everyone within a reasonable time frame, typically 24 hours.
Yeah, beautiful.
So clarity plus an effective business meeting, but then the multiplier is the degree of personal ownership that you bring to the table, you being anyone on the team. So some people have a really high degree of personal ownership. You know, back in the old days when I was a senior executive with Waffle House, you know, we had this mantra, if you touch it, you own it. And that's how you acted. If I was involved 1%, I acted like I owned 100%. That's how I was trained. Some people aren't as comfortable with that. Some people don't like accountability. They don't like ownership. They don't want to be in charge of things. But if you get the clarity right and you do it in the right vehicle, I would argue it's the meetings, then the leader can coach the team on increasing their level of ownership, pointing out why it's powerful, pointing out why it's meaningful, why you should do it. But I think if you get those three pieces right, that's going to elevate the degree of practical accountability in your team and your business. That's my take.
I love your take. So can I add a little refinement to the formula?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Because this formula is 3 days old.
Okay, all right. So if you remember in the trust formula, when we talk about building trust, we say it's authenticity plus vulnerability in parentheses.
Yes.
And the sum of that multiplied times credibility gets us trust.
Yes.
I think we should do the same thing with this formula.
I
We should
agree.
say it's clarity plus business meetings in parentheses,
Yes.
multiplied times personal accountability or personal ownership
Personal ownership.
gets us accountability.
Yes.
And the reason why I think that's important is because while ideally we have high level clarity, and high level clarity can also be things like metrics, like we have to hit this sales target this year.
Yes.
Right, that's a level of clarity that drives accountability. Okay, and then couple that with the tactical business meetings, really is a nice pairing. However, you could have those high level targets and not have effective business meetings, but if people still have a sense of personal ownership, you could end up with some level of accountability.
Yes.
Not quite perfect. So you could have one of them go to zero, and vice versa. Maybe
Yes.
the organization's struggling with clear goals, but in the business meetings, that manager or leader is really good about saying, okay, who's going to own what,
Right.
and assign those, right?
Right.
So it allows for one of those to be missing and still end up with a positive accountability metric.
I love that. I'm going to list you as co-author.
Okay.
You've enhanced the formula.
Okay. And it also reminds us of a really important point, which is true in the trust formula. If either side of that equation goes to zero, you got a problem.
Exactly.
So there's no overall clarity and no good business meetings or structure, then it doesn't matter people's personal ownership. Personal ownership to what?
Right.
They're making it up. So accountability is really going to go to zero because there's nothing for them to be accountable to. And the other's true too. You can have the greatest clarity organizationally, greatest business meetings. If you got people like, yeah, I'm not going to do that.
Yeah, I won't put my name on that.
Yeah, well, you're not going to have any accountability. So I do think there's an element there. Now, since you and I love practical, because we're all about practical at Leadership Foundry, and there's a reason for that. Folks who have gotten to know us know we're practical partly because we believe in it, but also partly because we want to see people change.
Yes.
We want to see people, every time they interact with us and we spend time with them, we want to see that to be a good use of their time and to see them in a different place the next time we see them. So while concepts are great, we're always trying to get people practical tips. So I've got a practical tip I'd like to add to this.
Yes.
That I know you're going to agree with. So often I work with clients and they're like, well, I ended the meeting and I told them all the things they were supposed to do. And I said, well, what did they say? Well, they didn't really say anything. They just listened. But I told them.
Right.
That's not really activating the right business meeting or the personal ownership.
Right.
Accountability happens when you hear the person say it.
Right.
So don't go around and assign everybody what they're going to do at the end of the meeting. Go around and have everyone say out loud what they're going to do between now and the next meeting. It's a simple shift in business meeting structure, but it's really important because when people say it out loud, we were talking earlier today, you were talking about some health goals you had. You said them out loud. All of a sudden, there's a level of accountability. Now, if I turn to you and say, Randy, how about this goal for you? you're not going to.
Yeah.
You're not going to. I know you well enough, my friend. You're not going to do that.
That would be great for you.
It'd be great for me to say it.
Yeah.
But you said it out loud. So there was a sense of
Right.
personal ownership. So that one gets activated when we say it out loud. So my additional kind of friendly reminder to everybody on this is if your folks aren't talking, they're probably not holding themselves to the accountability standard that you'd want them to hold themselves to.
If I was listening to this right now, I would say, okay, I'm with you guys. I get what you're talking about. I see the practical elements of the formula. I like where the discussion's going. But is it really that big of a deal? Yes, it's that big of a deal. This is an estimate. I don't have any data to cite, but it's my opinion. I don't know if you agree. It feels like 80 to 90% of the challenges we see out there are because people are way too vague when it comes to accountability. You were kind of going down that track, but a leader says something like, we just got to get sales up. We've got to get our sales number up. Okay, what does that mean? The meeting's over, the leader said get the sales number up, but who owns what? Where do we go? What resources do we have? What's my role to play here?
Yeah.
So there's a lot of vagueness. And then you get into the typical business meetings that we encounter. There are no agendas, no task ownership, no deadlines. It's just a conversation. So we have to get together again next week to have the same conversation we had last week because we didn't really have a very efficient meeting.
Yeah.
So we've got lots of vagueness that goes on, but then you go to the other extreme where you do sometimes see those organizations and leaders that over-index on consequences, where everything is a punishment. Okay, your bonus will be cut in half if you don't make that number. Hey, heads are going to roll if we don't get this objective met, guys. So you do run into that. Those leaders are typically short-lived. They don't make it very long. So you do see the extremes, but 80% of what we see is people's unwillingness to be clear and concise about what they want, use a vehicle that will get them there, and hold people accountable the right way. So this messy middle is where I think we need to live.
Okay, so I think this is a great kind of, if we think about this as like a college class, this is like accountability 101 or 201.
You know, I like pretending to be a professor. Go
Well,
on.
this is good. We're going to go to accountability 301 or 401.
Okay.
Okay. So now we're going to talk about accountability within senior teams.
Ah.
Okay. So you and I, this is for another show. But we have a methodology that we use when we work with senior teams, and we have different levels that we take those teams to. Mm-hmm. So to cut to the chase, our highest level, the hardest level to take a senior team to. So this is all our C-level executives, all sitting around a room. Or if you think about your senior team, wherever you might be listening to this right now, we try and get those teams to a point where they're not only having candid conversations, but they're holding each other to a standard of mutual accountability.
That is the high standard.
Yeah. So this is our 401 class.
The elusive.
Yes.
Standard.
Yeah. Very hard to do.
Yes.
Very hard to do. So I would love to get your thoughts on that. So let's take your formula that you built. Now, how do we do that with a colleague or peer? Mm-hmm. I'm in marketing, and I've hit my numbers, but operations is not hit theirs. Mm-hmm. How do I have that? Because often, I would love to hear you talk about this. Sure. What holds us back from having that conversation?
Right.
And then how can we do that in a way that is healthy? So we're creating mutual accountability versus individual accountability. Not versus, but and individual accountability.
You've gone into obstacles. You know how much I love obstacles. So let's talk about obstacles.
Okay.
Because you're right. There are reasons why we don't do these things. Part of it's raw fear. People are just afraid of, what if I say the wrong thing? What if I upset my colleague? I think fear of candor, lack of candor. People don't know how to have direct, open, honest conversations about things that matter. So I think that there's always this hesitancy about, I don't want to say anything. I don't want to ruffle feathers. That is pervasive. If you take any company name and put it in front of the word nice, that's your problem. Blank nice. We're all blank nice around here. We don't say what we need to say. So that, I think, restrains a lot of teams from saying what they need to say. But how do we actually activate this? How do we make it work? I believe it starts with the team leader. I think the team leader has got to set the tone. If the team leader is not on board with what you and I are talking about, I don't think this will end well. You can't have accountability with a leader that chooses to be vague, won't confront, won't say the right things, will not hold people accountable. So the leader has got to get on board with this. But if they do, if they are willing to practice greater clarity, if they are willing to probably buck their culture and actually institute effective and efficient business meetings, if they're actually willing to do it, and if they go through that, and then they start to really take a look at each team member and really gauge their level of personal ownership, their willingness to put their name next to things. If that leader will look at all of that and start to practice, you will see steady movement in the right direction. And then the great news is that will trickle down. Everybody at that table will start to do it with their direct reports and their teams, and it starts to permeate the organization. You and I have seen clients like this where this has actually happened, but it's got to start with the top, the very top, and then move down. That's my take.
Yeah, and I think what the irony in this is, we often think, at least I do, I hear mutual accountability and I immediately think conflict. Actually, what it creates is much more team and more humility.
Yeah.
So I never have seen this in practice, but I've read about it several times, that the Blue Angels, so that kind of elite
the
Navy team of pilots that do all the stunt shows, and I mean, they do incredible things. When they finish one of their missions, just one of those shows, at the end of every show, they sit around a table, all the pilots do, and every pilot has to go around and talk about what they could have improved upon. Mm-hmm. So the pilots don't go around and say, here's how I was amazing today, because they're all amazing in their own right. We're not questioning that. But they all had to go around and raise their hand and say, this is the thing that I was accountable for, that I could have done better, that I'm going to improve between now and next time. Mm-hmm. And it's a subtle, small thing, but it does a couple things. First, it creates a culture of continuous improvement. Second, it creates a culture of individual accountability. Third, it creates a culture of humility. It's like, I'm going to reflect on my own performance and recognize it wasn't perfect. Mm-hmm. And here's what I could be doing to make it better. So there is that, ultimately, so the team can get better. And I think there's something really powerful around that. And you and I have done versions of that before, and it's really telling when you do it, because you'll get that one leader who's like, no, I didn't have anything that I could improve upon. Everything was great.
Right.
And that is a problem.
But you know what you've done here that's very interesting? You actually have married the practical accountability formula to the trust formula. Because if you think about it, practicing what is the three components of the trust formula are what allow you to more actively practice the accountability formula.
Oh, that's a good point.
You've got to be vulnerable. You've got to be authentic. We have to have credibility with each other. And if you're doing those things well, if the trust formula is being enacted, then it's easier to enact the accountability formula.
So now we need a mathematician in the room to combine all the elements of the trust formula and the accountability formula.
I'm not your guy. I have a political science degree.
But I think you make a really important point, though, because it really is because when we think about teams we're on, we want teams that are mutually accountable.
Yes.
We want teams that we can trust each other.
Right.
And that everyone's open and humble, but also confident and skilled. And we want that. And we want to create an environment that recognizes that and encourages that.
Yes.
So any final tips you have, my friend, on going back to practical? If we've got leaders today listening to this, which I'm sure are out there saying, hey, I like what those guys are talking about. Yeah. I want to take something back to my team. I'm listening to this on the weekend. My team meeting is Monday. What's a starting place?
So I'm about to put myself out there. I'm about to make a bold statement. I see a blog series coming on practical accountability, but I've got some good news. The first two pieces of the formula are actually out there. We've written on this. So there's a post out there on the Leadership Foundry website on practical clarity.
Yep.
There's another post out there on effective business meetings. So if you're out there thinking today, I need to put this into place right away, you can at least get started with some good content on the Leadership Foundry website. I know you and I have done podcasts on these topics. Yeah. So I think there's enough out there to get you started. And then I think if you think about some of the past conversations we've had about what every leader should be doing right now, ask, listen, and invest. Really understand, what is it that your team brings to the table in terms of personal ownership? Why do I have some leaders that never speak up? Why does John and Susan and Mike never put their name next to anything? But Bill and Ray are always willing to jump in. So you've got to take a look at your team. So the reason that you and I are even having this discussion is you and I have just been having so many in-depth, candid conversations with clients lately where they are just overwhelmed and befuddled by, how do I improve accountability? Yep. So what we have been doing, hence this conversation, is helping them get super practical critical. And that's why I think the formula and our related conversation is really going to be helpful. So if you're a leader out there thinking, I want to get started right away, listen to this podcast again. Take a few notes. Go look at some of the content that we've got out there. It's a starting place. But I do think that what we have shared today is a good place to begin. And if we can help you, let us know.
Yeah, agreed. So I'll add a point of view around this too. So as you were talking, I think the good news in this is, as you already hinted, this ties into a lot of other conversations we have, both with our clients when we do Leadership Foundry sessions, but even on the podcast.
Right.
It even ties into author-editor. Because I think so often leaders think, I must own accountability. You must nurture and foster accountability. The owning of accountability is down at that individual ownership level, that personal ownership level, which is part of your formula. We're trying to get our teams to be authors so we can be editors.
Yes.
And the traits of the author is they take ownership, they show initiative, they display critical thinking. So the way you activate that, so you can activate the author-editor dynamic in these team meetings by simply having everyone go around and say, what's everyone going to do between now and the next meeting? Simple question, but that forces them to take ownership, forces them to take initiative, and forces them to do critical thinking. And if you don't like their response, like if their response is, well, I'll just show up to the next meeting. Well, let's talk about that. That's an opportunity for you to edit.
Yes.
So when our teams are talking, we're editing. When our teams are silent, we're authoring. And there's a tendency now for us to feel like we have to own everything. There's so much stress in the economy right now, stress on our leaders right now. And they have to feel like they have to own it. Well, that's the path to burnout, and that's not the path to a high-performing team. That's winning an MVP, not building a world championship.
Right.
And you and I are all about helping our leaders build world championships, because we've seen plenty of teams with MVPs with losing seasons.
Yes.
And don't be one of those. So I think there's a lot of ways that all these concepts marry together. So if I was to sum it up, re-listen to this show, make notes, and make sure when you're ending these meetings, don't do all the talking. Do some listening. Have everyone go around, talk about what they're going to do between now and the next meeting, and I think you'll see who gets it and who is worthy of some coaching conversations.
If you're a leader listening to this right now, another exercise to go along with what Brandon just shared is look in the mirror and ask yourself if you are guilty of the sin of assumption. Because a lot of what frustrates the leaders that we work with is I assume that people are going to have the same level of accountability that I would. Most leaders got to where they are because they took the reins, they were accountable, they jumped in with both feet, all the cliches. They did the things necessary to get to the role they're in. But they assume that their teammates, their colleagues, people more junior than them often, are going to have the same mindset, same attitude, same work ethic, all of that. And that's a challenge. It's something that gets in the way. So rather than assume that everyone will act the same way you will, take a look at your team, take a look at yourself, ask yourself who does this well. They're probably your favorites if you think about it. But then take a look at the people that frustrate you. That's a coaching opportunity, a great coaching opportunity.
Yeah.
And one of the things that you and I have talked about in the past is one of the responsibilities for leaders today that has been increasingly vacated is the leader's responsibility to coach their teams. You know, you and I have unlimited employment forever, I think, because there's always going to be a role for the coach and the leadership consultant, but leaders have got to do more to coach their teams. And this is a great area. I want my team to be better at accountability. Let me figure out where I'm making assumptions. Let me implement this new formula I just heard from Randy and Brandon. Let me try that trust formula. Let me go look at some of their stuff. But we have given you at least a starting point. Now, go do something with it.
Yeah, Randy, I think that's great. So for you listening today, we loved this conversation around accountability. I'm so glad Randy prompted it today. We would love to hear from you. What are some questions or challenges you're seeing in your workplace that'll be helpful for us to share our thoughts or insights on? Let us know. We would love to help you. But between now and our next conversation, listen to this show, take away your one nugget, put it in place tomorrow, because as with everything we do in the Leadership Foundry, it's all about helping you become a better leader, not only today, but for your team starting tomorrow.